Welcome to today's webinar. I'm Bev Carlton. I'm a people advisor for Team Ohana. Today, we're going to be talking to Frances Mendez Kloes, who's the VP of People and HR for DataGrail. I'm particularly excited to be talking to Frances. I have a history of her working with her almost a decade ago at Salesforce, and she has really honed her thoughts and strategy around compensation, which is one of the key metrics and problems that we solve when triangulating all of the data and decisions and strategy around how we're going to pay people to fit inside of the goals that we are all trying to achieve in HR, finance, and talent. I hope you'll enjoy the webinar. We look forward to your feedback after the show. Yeah, I thought it might be helpful. I could feel like I could do an intro on you from over 10 years ago, 10 plus 4 years ago, when we first met at Salesforce, and I was leading engineering recruiting, and you, I think, became a director of the HR VPs there. And since
I
then,
did.
you've had this really interesting career path, and people can check your LinkedIn profile. But I'd love to hear from you because you've done such interesting things. How do you surmise your experience just to ground people who are listening and taking notes?
Yeah, I think early in my career, I just kind of meandered through. I went with what I enjoyed, and I quickly shed what I didn't enjoy. I learned that I didn't enjoy finance, so I moved out of that, and I was just curious and always taking stock of what I really enjoyed and what I didn't. And then at my third startup, I realized that I needed something more to help unlock me and to really open my eyes to exploring new things. And so I went to business school. I did a dual MBA with Columbia and Haas, and it was a great opportunity. Not just the curriculum, but the people I had in my cohort, and the backgrounds were vast and a lot of experience. It was an executive MBA, so the median years of experience, I believe, was around 12 years of experience. And I learned so much from them. I learned resilience, and grit, and how to speak up in a way that was able to influence people, um, as well as all the curriculum, the finance, the statistics, how numbers are so incredibly important, and how to measure what matters. So when I was done with that, I thought I would go into management consulting, because why not? It seemed so sexy. And I had two friends from the program who were in consulting, and it just seemed like such a important role in businesses, especially when you don't have the brain power within your organization to step outside of your organization and think about how you can actually drive improvements. And that was great. I got to touch a lot of quasi municipalities during that time. And then I went to Salesforce and went back into the people business after having seen how businesses could be improved and the value that the people organization can truly drive towards success. Before I went to business school, I was just kind of moving paper around. I was answering questions and I didn't really enjoy it that much. But after I went to business school, I think there was also a change in the value that the people organization within tech was appreciated. And so from there on out, I really focused on how can I help drive success versus how can I just do this one thing, and and so on. I continued to look for opportunities where I could continue to grow Neustar, Optimizely, and just used every opportunity, every platform to grow as a human, as a leader.
I think one of the things well, there's so many things that's interesting about your background having that finance and economic perspective and people team perspective. Then you went from large to small to kind of mid-size to startup. Um, and so, with all of the experiences that you've had, is there a moment that you felt like, okay, I think I know what I'm doing now?
Yeah, I still feel like I'm learning. Always be learning. But I think by the time I got to Neustar, I had experienced such a broad set of experiences in different industries. I had worked in tech, obviously, which is where my home is, retail, management consulting, and I had worked on almost every function, finance, operations. I even went so far as setting up the T1 cable lines and office builds outs. Um, Going to Neustar, it was an entirely different industry. I was also remote for the first time. And not only being remote, but I was influencing an organization that really hadn't had a lot of exposure to Silicon Valley tech. And the reason why that was so important was I could have taken the opportunity to really understand what our business was about and what our leaders were concerned with and gone in leading with that, which I did, or there could have been a lot of friction. And so that would be the moment where I felt like I really do know what I'm doing. There are things that I'm figuring out, but I felt like I had the tools to be able to handle every situation.
I'd love to press on that one for a second. Coming on the heels of an article I read, likely on LinkedIn about a year ago, where the question was asked, are heads of are CHROs the new product managers? And I think I only lasted 5 minutes into the article that there was, a, I guess the point of view of the author was we used to be in a people function, thinking, creating experiences, wanting people to feel good, writing policies and posters and manuals and all of those things. And all of
Yeah.
a sudden, for companies at scale, yes, you have to have that still in place where people feel that they have a solid culture and a backstop. But how do you make that transition? Or as you started relying on thinking about efficiency in an HR organization that's growing at scale, how did your perspective start to change on using tools, thinking about processes efficiency, and then how do you transition a team and your leadership into sort of that mentality of servicing the business? Because that's quite the pivot from traditional HR.
It really is. Um, I think the experience that I had at Mercer was really foundational in my evolution and thinking differently and thinking about how organizations now think about people. Um, our product is the employee experience. Our product is creating creating and supporting a culture that drives business success. The people organization doesn't own the culture, but we have a incredibly important role in determining what it is and ensuring that it lives in every program, in every policy, in every communication that a company has. So I'm kind of forgetting the smaller bits of the question, but I think what's important in driving efficiency is understanding where the organization finds the most value across the business, and how does the people organization deliver on that value. Things that are lower value, that are repeatable, how can we automate that so that the people in the people organization have the cycles freed up to really be thought partners, to have opportunities to learn about the employee experience, to talk with people, to continue to edit what what it means to be at said company, at DataGrail, for instance. And I think so. Efficiency is all around what matters, where's the value, give your headspace to that. The lower value activities that are also important, because important activities can be high value, but they're repeatable. Automate the heck out of that and focus on really driving higher value activities.
I appreciate you saying that because as I've had cross-functional type of roles managing some of the people functions, more philosophy based rather than tactical. The tactical execution is the one that I see now really draining the organization of its resources. And in particular, the sort of the midline managers and HR folks on the team who are really advancing in their career because they've gained an understanding of how to do this are still getting pulled back into the weeds with ticketing systems, needing to have one-on-one conversations, documentation, not having data readily available. And I'd love to hear your advice for someone who is thinking about proposing budget solutions or having executive level conversations with, this is the problem at hand, this is the experience that we're having, here's what it's costing, and navigating those types of conversations as you get to that in sort of that mid and advancing career stage.
This is such a great question. It's so timely. We actually are embarking on setting up or implementing an HRIS. And the whole purpose of that is so that we can have a leaner people organization where we are focusing on the right things. And we also need data. So the sell on that, fortunately, was not difficult because we currently have two systems. And the friction that we had from using these two systems and the lack of reporting, URM reporting, tenure, all that good stuff, it's not at our fingertips, and we aren't able to measure what matters to the business. We're not able to track our success. So fortunately, that was a much easier sell because the business was feeling it. And I was able to share how all the things that we will unlock and be able to do in the people organization to drive health scores. How are we doing from a hiring, internal mobility, and separation numbers? These are all really important for us to measure, in addition to all those other things like employee surveys and exit interviews. So that will free us up a lot from doing the manual onboarding activities or offboarding activities. And fortunately, I have an executive team that really understands that. So it was a pretty easy sell.
You're very fortunate, because I think what I've witnessed in the past is executives, particularly finance and operations executives, have fairly mature systems in place. And they are tasked from the board and the executive team to have real-time access to everything that's happening from spend and allocation. But on the HR side, so much of what we need to report to keep the business cadence is wonky. Multiple data sources, and not to get too much into the weeds on that. I'm wondering, and this is a leading question, I'm just going to admit it. I'm wondering if you've seen people who otherwise would have had long, successful careers fall down in that moment when they weren't able to make the proper recommendations on tools and processes, or have that up-level conversations with other ELT or executive leadership team members about how critical it is to get that data, how we're going to go about it, how we think about spend and ROI, because that's next level, right? You see people hanging out at mid-career, and it seems like there's this, just this really intersection point where HR leaders who want a high trajectory in their career have to make that leap. And you made it. I'd love to hear how maybe it was your education or background, but I'd love to hear any even war stories that you have on your own career or others around you where there was a miss or an opportunity.
Yeah, I feel like I've had so many coaches and so many mentors. One of them we worked with at Salesforce, and I had the pleasure of working with again at Optimizely as our chief people officer, Erin Flynn. I really watched her. I watched how she always took stock. She always had a company hat on. It was never, I'm doing this for the people organization. Never. It was, what does the company need? And what are my stakeholders, our CFO, what do they need? What are their pain points and what are their goals? And how can we align collectively on what the business needs in order to make this investment? whether it's headcount or systems or what have you. And it's the power of we, because we're solving together, not I, not you, in using intentional language that never puts people on their back leg. Never is a
Mhm.
pretty, big word, but that doesn't put people on their back leg. That brings people together. Oh, okay, this is what we can solve together. So absolutely, I think for folks who either don't see the need to scale or are unable to influence others to join the journey, I think it can be very career limiting because they're not able to demonstrate their ability to think strategically when they're always in the weeds.
Yeah. Um, yes. And on that one, I had an interesting conversation with the CEO yesterday who was looking at a head of HR through our portfolio. And this subject came up when um, the CEO said, I feel like this HR leader is always talking about their team and what their team is going to need to be
Mm,
efficient. And the CEO had a hard time getting the CHRO candidate back to kind of global thinking about, yes, you have a team to run, but we really need that team thinking about how they're running in greater service to the business. And he just couldn't
right.
get the candidate there. And so we had this conversation about, I think HR leaders really struggle, particularly in larger organizations. And as you're learning to become a leader, you've grown up supporting your peers. You've grown up in all
Hmm.
the facets, comp and ben, L&D, performance
Hmm.
management, HRBPs, and
Hmm.
it's really easy to get sucked into all of the day-to-day as a leader of managing that function because you're a leader just like product, engineering, marketing,
Yeah.
but that now you have two roles because you have to manage your particular organization that's massive, and now
Hmm.
that organization has to be in service managing the rest of the company as well, or providing support for the rest of the company. So I'd love to hear how you think about that, or if you've witnessed those sorts of struggles between HR leaders and their development paths.
Absolutely. I think to answer the first bit of the question, I think this is where OKRs or V2 moms, this is where they're so incredibly important. When you have your company level goals, and then each department within the organization is creating goals based off of that, you're moving in the right direction from a mental and an outcome perspective. Um, and that's the other thing. When I think about, well, what programs are we going to be delivering? What initiatives? What does our calendar look like for the year? It's what are the outcomes that we're driving? How do those outcomes align with um, being in all the right conversations, or whatever your objective is at the company level? And if that action doesn't ladder up, then you have to think to yourself, is this going to fall below the line? Because I need to make room for things that actually lead to our success. I have seen people, leaders, where it is just about getting something out of the door. And the challenges that I've seen in that scenario is you you actually start to become irrelevant.
Mm.
The product that you're putting out there, product being like policies or trainings or insert whatever the action is, you're missing the needs of the business. And people may overlook whatever it is that you're putting out there because it's not in line with what they're trying to achieve for the success of the business.
Yeah, it seems like we as HR people practitioners can become a little bit tone deaf thinking about the tactical aspects or facets of our function, and it becomes a little bit of an eye roll to the rest of the org that's like, well, thanks for the
Yes.
poster and what unlimited time off really means, but I really need to learn how to have productive one-on-one conversations with performance management, and I need you all to pivot to meet me where I am. And I've seen that frustration from leaders in other orgs as well, from people teams where they don't have your type of expertise and background to always be thinking one level up. like Erin Flynn, who
Mm-hmm.
I witnessed do that
Mm-hmm.
at Salesforce as well too. Like she was an absolute business operator who happened to own the HR support function, but you never thought
Mm-hmm.
of her like that. Um,
No, yeah.
so
She always had her finger on the pulse. And I think it's really easy to lose connection, especially in a large company, because you just
mhm.
focus on the doing. So it's important to create those listening valves to know where the business is going, to double check on what are the things that we're working on. And sometimes it gets frustrating because you may think to yourself, well, gosh, we already did that and people aren't doing that thing. Then it goes back to change management. And maybe that means that you edit what you're delivering to create space to go back to those things that haven't necessarily gotten traction and that will create positive change. So you have to be
Have
nimble.
you, yeah, have you had to do that in your past where you had your roadmap of initiatives that of course map to your OKR or your V2 mom, to use Salesforce language, and you recognized, okay, we're just not going to hit it here. There's a disconnect between the needs of the business and what we set out to do. And if so, I'd love to hear how you manage that or convince someone to allow you to shift your roadmap.
Yeah, I think this often happens with activities that aren't frequent enough for the muscle memory to exist.
Mm,
Development conversations, performance development conversations, um, and compensation planning are things that don't happen that often. And so, because I know that now, you create space in the schedule to have training sessions along the way because you know it's going to come up, and you also know that these are incredibly important um, activities for the manager. If you think about people leaders and what they're empowered to do, what they truly have the ability to do, hire, they make the hiring decision. They are supporting the careers and the of their team members, and compensation. These are the things that we want them to get right. If they don't get it right, then the team suffers and the company might suffer if you have unwanted attrition. So having seen these things need to have repeat training and voiceover, you just start to create space in the system to make time for that.
I think that's an incredible point. As HR leaders and people team leaders are building out, creating space for the unexpected or the reoccurring events that maybe are more quarterly or biannually than they are on a monthly calendar, they can slip beneath the track. But boy, if you don't empower your managers to have really productive conversations, everything that you've done to that point is just gone. Right? It doesn't matter anymore.
Out of
If
the
people
window.
don't feel, yeah, if people don't feel like they can have a great conversation with their manager, nothing that you've done matters.
Yes, and people want to grow. We just ran our
Yeah.
employee survey, and people want to grow. They want to know how they're being measured. They want to know what success looks like. So it's incumbent on every business to do what they need to and can to really shore up their leaders. And it's not to say that leaders have to know all the information, but they just need to know how to take the conversation,
Hmm.
and to encourage and not be fearful of having a conversation about somebody wanting to grow and learn, somebody wanting to move into another part of the organization. At Optimizely and then at Okta, when I worked with Eric Kelleher on the post sale side, it was really important for us to see people grow their careers internally versus go somewhere else. And
Yeah.
so we had an internal mobility goal at each organization. And it was great because it actually held us accountable to support our leaders to think um, bigger picture, that development was not just on their team, it was not just in their department, but it was how might you go elsewhere? How might you go from post sales to pre sales or to product, for instance? And so it really changes the climate quite a bit when you empower your managers and you help them not be fearful.
Yeah, absolutely. It's something I'm working on right now. Um, Documenting training for newer and career managers who maybe at a startup, we see this a lot where highly productive individuals who've been ICs be given an opportunity to take on some direct reports. And, at earlier stage companies, it's like, well, here's your team, go. Without a
Good
lot
luck.
of, yeah, hope it goes great. Of course, we only hear about it when it doesn't go great, right? We never hear the
Hmm.
good stuff,
Hmm.
and typically it just doesn't go great. But I'd love to switch or sort of move tracks and hear, what are you working on right now that feels timely or interesting or dynamic given the market, that you would be able to share with the folks who have registered?
Sure. Timely, interesting, scary, all at once. So I am embarking on building our compensation philosophy for DataGrail.
Ugh.
And it's, we're in a very different world than the last time I thought this through, because we're distributed everywhere. DataGrail is in 27 different states in Canada.
Oh,
So how do we think about compensation? Where is the market going? Um, and so I'm going to be working very closely with our leader of finance, with our CEO and other stakeholders to make sure that we are in alignment on what are we trying to achieve, because it's not just pay bands.
mhm.
That's the easy part. It's how do we want to leverage compensation to attract, retain, and reward employees, and the different components of compensation. So I'm excited about it, and I'm definitely leaning in. And the way I am approaching that is, it kind of goes back to what I shared earlier. What do I know about these leaders and their goals and what their concerns are, and how can I bring that to the conversation, at the forefront of the conversation, so that they know I know their business and we can come to agreement much more quickly, much more effectively or efficient, to use the word we were talking about earlier. And that will um, grow with the business, because you don't want to create a philosophy that you're going to have to change. It has to be very
Mhm.
forward looking, has to take into consideration our industry, our competitors, and what the market might do.
Yeah.
And so I'll be presenting, a very thorough approach in terms of what are all the key elements, what are the things that we need to be thinking about, what are the risks, and what are the outcomes that we're looking to achieve together.
May I ask you a quick question? And if you're not allowed to answer it, I certainly understand. Can we talk about geographical based comp for a second? Because I'm seeing this come up in all of my feeds, and our portfolio CEOs are all asking the same question. It's shifted so rapidly post
Hmm.
COVID and now return to
Hmm.
work. Um, and maybe it's your philosophy. What would you recommend if you don't want to talk about data grail? Um, what would you recommend to an organization who's resetting how they're thinking about distributed compensation models, and kind of what are you hearing as best practices?
Yes. So the data shows that for tech, at least, compensation has really smoothed out across the continental United States. In Europe, it is still differentiated, not only across country because it's the big back index, but where you are locally. I think that's really important when you think about your comp philosophy, because when everybody went virtual, companies took very different approaches. Some companies didn't make any changes to comp, so you could move from one coast. You could move from a coastal location to a less coastal location, and you're retaining your same compensation. And maybe they did a little game of catch up, or maybe not. Maybe you were still eligible for the same type of rewards, and then while others had many tiers. And so I think when a company is thinking about their if they're going to apply a geo differential, it's who are the companies that you are seeking talent from and what are they doing? And who are you bleeding talent to and why? And that, those, and what is the talent you're trying to seek as well? Because what the data is also telling us is that workers, non-virtual workers or workers who are in the office, the compensation is lower. There could be a number of different reasons for that. It could be that they are less experienced roles. For instance, they might be SDRs who benefit from being able to be in a bullpen together in the office. There could be a number of other reasons as well. But think about where you're trying to attract talent, why you're losing talent, and have that be a very large input to how you're thinking about applying geodifferentials, because you can have them, and then you can also apply them to varying degrees, right? You could have maybe just a 5 or a 10%, for instance. And I would also look at other levers. Like, are there other levers that can be pulled if you're not willing to come down on compensation? What were some of the benefits and perks that were offered when people were in the office? For instance, if there was ever office, some companies have come up during this time and they don't have that look back. But are there other benefits and perks that you could do away with in order to support compensation? So it's really taking a larger lens and understanding where you want to play in the market.
I appreciated what you just said. I'll taking note on this. Using a data-informed approach on maybe it's offer letter accepts or whatever your attrition metrics are and the reasons why you're getting regretted or non-regretted attrition. So rather than just, I think we should do this, being much more strategic about particular geos have different peer sets that are going to influence who they're attracting, who they're retaining, and who they're losing talent to, and being much more methods-based in their approach to forming a strategy. So that was a really great point. Thank you. I'm going to actually take that back into a meeting this afternoon. So
for sure,
I'm going to lift that one from you.
Yeah, compensation is so important. Data is so important anyway, but compensation is so crucial to get right that very seldom do I use gut when it comes to that. And also because you want to be equitable when you think about compensation, and proactive versus reactive, and that helps us ensure that we are also equitable in our pay practices.
Yeah. And data collection on that. So now add another ingredient to the stew that we've had that's been so challenging lately is now like pay transparency. And the capability as a product owner in compensation and the greater strategy for people. Now pay transparency has entered as well. And so you have that as a baseline to be considering, but now you have all of the geographical impacts. At least I'm out fishing from multiple data sources for our portfolios that don't have a stop solution for this. It gets incredibly complicated and it's hard to validate. So if an employee or a manager comes forward and says, hey, I feel like we're off here, if you don't have a system of record and a really solid philosophy around why you do what you do, where you do it, now you've got multiple conversations and lots of holes to go down to and potential liability on that particular topic. So quite complicated.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I guess so. Maybe one of the final questions I have for you is, because you've had such an interesting loop, your education with your master's programs, economics, finance, HRBP, compensation philosophy, strategic HR leadership, startup culture, mega company culture, now sort of in the mid-size range. If you were to take some of the lean in, I guess, content and say what I would tell my younger self, 15 years ago, as an emerging people leader, what would I tell myself to become prepared? And And maybe the second layer would be, what do I wish I would have known about what this function actually is?
What would I have known? What would I tell my younger self to be prepared? Prepare for not being prepared. There
Yeah.
are so many situations that you can't predict. And I think it's telling who a person is at their core and how they react to the unplanned. So I think it ties into um, what I would tell my younger self, which is know the value of bygones. You know, sometimes you make a mistake. The world is not going to end. The energy that gets consumed when you sit there and kind of mull over the tragedy of what happened is a lot. So I learned that I need 24 hours to be able to lick my wounds and come back. And I give myself that time. I would also say be intentional. Whatever you do, make sure that it is with purpose. And I definitely learned this a little bit later in life. I wish I had learned it earlier, but you know what? I may not have met the people I have. I may not have had the great opportunities I have had if I was so intentional the whole time, but be intentional anyway. And words matter, and people listen, especially as you continue to ascend within an organization or your role. Also, when you're in the people business, you can get to mid-tier. People, they think you're an expert, and so you have to wear that hat um, respectfully. If you don't know something, say I don't know and come back to them, but act with intention and act with integrity, and everybody deserves respect and dignity regardless of the situation.
Yeah, and that's getting back into the tactics too, some of the softer
Mm-hmm.
elements of what we do. Okay,
Yeah.
this has been helpful. I know that you're likely to get calls from me in
Bug
the
you.
future
Yeah.
as some of these more complicated issues of product and data and career transitions go. But it's been so wonderful to reconnect with you, and I know you're busy, so we're really grateful for your time.
So great to see you too, Bev, and happy to chat with you again. Thank you.
All right. All right. Thank you. Take care.